Welcome to the Magic and Miracles podcast, where we share and explore profound stories that bring science and spiritual together in the most illuminating and unexpected ways. A miracle is defined as something outside the realm of what you believe is possible for you. These stories will lift and enlighten, showing you that anything is possible. I am your host, Nicole Magic. Join me as we dive into real-life extraordinary stories that will captivate your curiosity, shift your mindset, and bring healing to your soul. From real-life angels to the strange and paranormal, get ready to embark on a new, inspiring journey with each episode that prove magic and miracles happen every day. Hello and welcome, everyone. We have a treat for you today because we're going to go deep diving as usual, but maybe a little bit deeper today because my guest today, Franco Romero, he is a top 10 best-selling author. He is a clairvoyant, spiritual coach, and speaker, and his first book is titled The Closet Spiritualist, which was inspired by a near-death experience which left him clairvoyant. Abilities he was unwilling to recognize until his awakening in 2010, when he was reintroduced into a collective consciousness known as Caleb, a voice which he has been guiding him since he was a young boy. Franco is currently writing his second book, so we'll talk about that after and hear it from the author's mouth. And it's really from this perspective of God consciousness. And Franco holds 2 master's degrees and is co-founder of MyNourish, a formulator of a powerful superfood and plant-based nutrition for the body, mind, and soul, which is extremely important, especially for these times, because we've got to nourish our bodies so our bodies can nourish us. I know a lot of my clients come to me with that in mind and how to do that. So maybe we can get some more insights on that straight from Franco himself. Thank you so much, Franco, for being here with me. We have so many synchronicities and everything. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you here today.
Yes, I am very, very excited to have this conversation with you. And having had some conversations with you just prior to this, I have a feeling that this is going to be a very interesting one. So, woo, let's go.
Right? Woo, let's do it. First, let's hear, or let's tell the audience what happened to you. You have a profound near-death experience. So can you give that story so that people can understand where you're coming from and how tapped in you are to that consciousness that's out there?
Okay.
Within us.
I will try to abbreviate it a little bit just because there is so much that came out of the near-death experience, which again, you and I have talked about a
Yes.
lot. And sometimes I find that sometimes the story itself is fascinating because I was enthralled by it for years. But it's what came out, the messages that came out of it that are even more inspiring. And so when I was a little boy, and I mean like very little, I was 6 months old, I got really sick. And at the time, my mother thought that I was just going through a real bad cold or maybe the beginnings of a flu, but she never assumed that it was anything too serious. But just to be on the safe side, she took me in to have me seen by somebody to make sure that I was taken to a hospital that wasn't too far away from where we lived. We lived in a small community. Back then I was born and I was living in South America. And so these were very small little clinic hospitals. When I arrived, the physicians could see that I was having a lot of trouble breathing. So they wanted to keep me overnight for observation, but it wasn't much later that they realized that my situation wasn't getting better and that they didn't really seriously know if I was going to make it through the night. So they told they came in, they were coming in and out a lot, but they came in and they pulled my mother aside and they told her that it looked like at best I would maybe make it a couple more hours, that everything was sort of pointing in that direction, and they really didn't have much they could do. They felt kind of helpless about it. So um, they asked if they could have the hospital chaplain or priest come in and be with the family and sort of minister the last rites. And at this point, my mother, she kind of disconnected from the whole experience. And so I want to just kind of take a pause here, because I am telling you a story that happened when I was 6 months old. And so the obvious thing, people are going to go, how do you even know about this unless you were told about it? So I want to fast forward, because when I was about 15 years old, and I had already been experiencing some very bizarre things in my life, such as having lived in a house that I would have called, and I did call, the hauntings. Serious paranormal stuff occurred in that home, and much other things. So I was living a life where the normal wasn't the normal, but I just assumed it was the normal. So by the time I was 15, I started getting visions and dreams, and there was a reason for this. I was going through a period in my life where I was really feeling disconnected from everything. Um, it was pretty intense. I didn't feel like I belonged in this world, so to speak, and I was really having a hard time grappling with this as a young teenager. Just didn't know how to process it. I wasn't raised very spiritually. We lived, or were raised as Catholics, but it wasn't like it was force fed into us. My mother was a serious devout Catholic. My dad was just the opposite. Um, so I didn't really know where to turn to in any of this. I don't want to go back into time too much and age me, but this was a time when the internet didn't exist. There wasn't these support outlets that there are today. You just kind of had to wing it on your own. So, so I'm getting these dreams over and over again of a night where I'm in a hospital and I am there, but I'm not seen. And I see this baby in an incubator type of arrangement. And my mother's young and my aunt is young. And these people, I don't even know who they are. And I feel them is the biggest thing. I could the right away, the instant thing that attracted me to this whole dream was that, unlike other dreams, I could feel their energy. I could feel the stream of consciousness. I could feel what they were feeling, what they were thinking. But more importantly, I was really attached to my mom. I was really kind of drawn into her energy. So it was as if the narrative was really around her and my attachment with her. And so as this whole thing was progressing and as she disconnected from the conversation, I felt her desire to leave the hospital and to go to a nearby church where she felt this desire to meditate, pray, whatever. So I followed her down these streets. It wasn't very far from the hospital. And when she got about a block away, she was so overwhelmed with emotion that she got on her knees, crawled for the last block or so to the hospital, because there's this long boulevard. And she crawled up the stairs and into the church and up to the altar. And there she really got into a very strong sort of meditative feel. I mean, it wasn't like a prayer energy. It wasn't as if she was begging or pleading for me to live. It was more of a gratitude, appreciation type of feeling, that she was so, so appreciative of the time that she had had with me, even though it's just 6 months. She was so grateful for having had the time to feel my beingness, my light, what have you. I was so moved by it. I remember in my dream feeling the same feelings that she was, that I was literally starting to cry. Um, and I remember that at that moment, she had this sense of sort of this calmness started to take over her. And in that moment, she started to see a vision of what my life would be like as I grew up. Even though she knew that she was going to probably never see this, she later on told me that she doesn't even remember why she started having this vision of the future, but she just went with it. And she saw me becoming, you know, the father that I became, and the husband, and the person that I became, and contributing to everybody, and being this sort of person of giving and loving and whatnot. And she remembers that she started to, in her vision, she started to have this sort of joyous laugh to it, like, you know, she was so happy to see that. And, you know, and even though she was still in tears in some ways, but it was never again about the lack of what was happening. It was about the joy of being able to experience it. She remembers having gratitude, and I remember feeling that gratitude, like thank you for giving me the opportunity to see something that I would most likely never see, because she expected that by the time she came back to the hospital, she was going to find out that I was dead, which is kind of in and of itself an interesting thing, because, you know, most people would stay at the hospital and spend the last few hours with somebody that was dying. But in her case, she felt compelled to leave. So when she came back, and to her surprise, even though she was in this state of calmness, expecting that she would just be fine and no matter what the news was, she came to find out that in the short period of time that she was gone, everything changed. My fever broke, my organs that were shutting down came back, my vitals came back, and basically I was fine. I was on my way to like an immediate recovery. The doctors approached her and told her that they didn't really understand what had happened. But, you know, like in those days in particular, but even now, what do doctors usually do? They just kind of go, well, I guess it was a miracle, is basically how they usually write it off. And her being very devout Catholic took it just as it was on face value, never questioned it again. And the next day I was on my way back home. Now, the part two of this was that in addition to that, I was also having these other dreams and visions. And the reason I say visions is because I would wake up in the morning and I would just have these lucidness dreams. And in that, I saw what had happened to me, the baby, when I was in the incubator while she was at the hospital. And I saw myself leaving my body and leaving the room, and immediately being drawn into this light that was out there. But it was really interesting, because what happened was is that I found myself all of a sudden in this huge desert-like area. It wasn't hot. It was just, I was in the middle of a desert. I didn't really understand why. And I saw these people, but in particular, I saw this old man who looked really frail and decrepit, and he was staring. I could tell that I was somewhat levitated from them, and he was staring and pointing his hand out as if he was asking for something. And at first I thought he was asking it of me, but I realized that he was looking through me. And when he looked through me, I could tell that when I turned around was this beautiful orb. It was probably about 10 times the size of our sun. And I remember instantaneously thinking, well, why isn't this like burning me up, and why isn't it burning my eyes? That was the big thing. I was like, you know, normally you look at the sun, you're kind of having to squint if you could see it. But this wasn't hurting my eyes. It was so warm. I could stare at it all day long. And so then I looked down, and the old man became this little boy, and this little boy was doing the same thing. And so I looked up again, and this orb was like right on top of me. And when it got on top of me, I felt every cell in my body just start to vibrate. Sounds kind of familiar to another story we were just talking about.
Yes.
And my body, everything was vibrating uncontrollably. I couldn't understand. I didn't know what was going on. So it was as if every cell was like thirsty for this light. And so I just went with it, and this light just came, and it just overtook me. And when it overtook me, I could feel its rays going right through me. So, you know, they say you have 50 trillion cells or so in your body. the cool thing, and the thing that literally, even at that time and today, it still baffles me, and I can't really explain it the way I wish I could, but it was as though I felt this enormous blissful experience happening. This see, like I said, there's no adjective to really describe this, but it wasn't just happening to me. It was happening to every single cell in my body. But it wasn't as though I was experiencing it as me experiencing this vibration of every cell for about a brief moment. I can't tell you, maybe 2, 3 seconds or so. I felt myself within each cell. I was each cell. For a brief moment, I felt myself 50 trillion ways having this experience, as if I could experience me looking back at me in every which way. It was the most bizarre and most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. And so then when the light came over me and I got really close, I could see that there were images coming through the light. And those images were of these sort of silhouette type of beings that I knew them. I knew them. I mean, they didn't have any characteristics to them. They didn't have any facial features or anything that would define them as a man or a woman. They were just there, and I knew exactly who they were. I knew that they were family and friends from lives way beyond this world, way beyond this world. And they all surrounded me. And I could see that there were just an endless stream of others who were behind them and all around me. They were just everywhere. And the crazy thing is that I knew them all and they knew me. This light, these streams of individual lights went forever, and I knew every single one of them. But these 4 or 5, these 3, 4, 5 that surrounded me gave me this big hug. And I talk about this in the book because at that point, I literally just blew up. I mean, what was left of what I sensed was a body was gone. I became one with this light. It was so easy. I didn't lose my individualness, but I just became one. I became endless. So just before I left that experience, it was because I didn't really remember this until much later, that there was this sort of essence around me. And this essence didn't really do a lot of talking, but it didn't have to because I could feel it, telepathically. And the essence was trying to get me to, for just a moment, get out of this sort of blissful experience that I was in. To be perfectly honest, if I really, really wanted to give it a name, it really isn't just blissfulness. Okay. It was literally orgasmic. Okay. I mean, it was that doesn't even do justice to what I felt, but it's just beyond, it's just beyond. This thing started to speak telepathically to me, and it asked me to look around and to tell it what I saw. So it would keep saying, "What did you see?" And I looked around, and I really just saw a lot of different lights, and they were just endless. And they kept saying, "What do you see?" And they must have said this at least several dozen times. And I finally realized, I started looking around at all this. And I literally, as I'm talking to you, I could see this vision. I mean, it's so clear to me. And I went, "Oh, I get it." And as the moment I said that, I shot through this tunnel, the kind that everybody talks about. There's light streaming everywhere. It's sort of translucent because beyond there's just like images of galactic stellar, I don't know what it was. It was just like I was in the middle of somewhere very far away. And then I landed my body. Now, this is 15 years later. I landed my body as if I had just had that experience in a sweat, unaware where I was, not wanting to be here. And I started bawling, crying because I didn't want to leave. And this happened multiple times. And every time it was always the same thing. I would always start to cry because I went home again and I didn't want to come back. So I kept that a secret for a while, but I couldn't deal with it for too much longer. And so I went to my mom and I asked her, I said, "Listen, I've had these dreams. You were in it. I dreamt that I was dying. that I died. I went to heaven. I came, let's call it heaven because I have a different interpretation of all that now, but it was beautiful regardless. And I said, does any of this like ring a bell to you? And I remember the first time I told her, we were in the kitchen and her mouth literally dropped. She had to sit down, and she said, I can't believe that you just described the night that you died, because she was going to tell me later, like when there was always going to be that moment when she was going to tell me that I died, but she just had never found the time to do it. But she said that I recounted everything, even the conversations that she had with the doctor, even the prayer that she had in the church, the visions that she had. She said everything was exactly the way it happened. And she said, you really need to share this with somebody. And I'm going, no, I'm not going to share. I can't even make sense of this right now, much less share it at a time when people would have either thought I was crazy and put me on medication, or they would have called for an exorcism or something. But they wouldn't. There was nobody that was going to be able to help me with this, and so I wound up carrying it around with me forever, really, until like you said, until my awakening.
I think like part of that is, having an experience of my own, there's this, because it's so ineffable, there are no words. It's really hard to describe something that you truly don't have words for, and you have this understanding that this vocabulary is so flawed and so like there's nothing like it's
There's,
barely anything. It's very rudimentary. And to try to describe something that is so profound, that's so simple yet so complex,
yeah, I think you
you
really,
can't grasp it. You have to have had the experience or one of your own to understand anything about what somebody else might have gone through. And most people have not, even though it is very, it's way more common now.
yes.
But that grasping and absorbing, it just, the mind is almost incapable without a knowing.
It is. I mean, you said a lot there. You know, that each one we can go and we can have a conversation. Every one of them, as we now know between you and me, that we could do this.
Yes, a
And we
fractal.
could have a year-long series of episodes on this. But you're right. There is no words to describe what I experienced, and the uniqueness of the experience, because every one of us that have had NDEs, and by the way, this is the thing that I tell people, is that in a sense, the reason why so many people are so intrigued now about near death experiences is yes, there is this element of what exists possibly out there on the other side. There's this sense of curiosity of what could possibly be, to help people through that question of, is there something after life? I tell people that the reason why people are curious is yeah, partly because of that, but mostly because they want to remember. They want to remember because they have had this experience. They actually have had this experience thousands of times, because we have all had lives where we have gone back and come to another life. In other words, reincarnated. We have all gone through the series of dying and gone through this whole awareness of decompress. I call it decompression, where you transition from physical to spiritual. We want to remember, and so this is one way of doing it. And but yet you're right. There's no words. There's just no words. Words are limited in the way that you can describe this, and it's just so unfortunate because it's so amazing.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. And so we're left with these limited thought forms of words, and we try to describe them as best as possible. But yet people get it. It resonates with them. They feel it. They somewhere deep within them, they know this rings true to them. And they want more, and so they keep searching and searching for something that will help trigger their remembrance. So yeah, it's a
This
profound
is
experience,
why
but
it's so important to share these stories, right?
yeah.
Because like there is something that sometimes I'll say things with my clients, and I could say them 3 times. I could say it 37,322 times. And it's that next time, whether it's me or someone else, it could be entirely someone else saying it another different way.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it clicks. It's when you're ready, you're ready. When you're not, you're not.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to, is when you're ready to unlock that next level. So
And if I could just add one quick thing to that, and
yes,
and this is so I've had, I do a lot of spiritual guiding and coaching. I really kind of view myself as a guide, a physical manifestation of what people would call their guides. And most of my students have not had NDEs. But many of them, in fact, all of them have had STEs, which is spiritually transformative experiences. And so I've had them tell me, oh, so Franco, you died, you crossed over, you got to see the light, you went into the light, you got all of these clairvoyant gifts that came back with you. It's in a sense, it's easier for you to talk about this stuff and to experience this stuff. And I said, okay, facts. I'm not gonna lie. Okay. That has helped. Okay. But again, we've all been there. We're all actually there already. In other words, I try to make them see that they're not here trying to get there, that they're there trying to remember that they're actually not here, if that makes any sense. And so they are already experiencing the very things that I'm just remembering now. And in that process, they realize that in many cases, they may not have had a near-death experience, but they had a lot of different a series of spiritually transformative experiences.
I
Things
think that's really important. And I'm
yes,
sorry to cut you off on there, but as you continue speaking, can you tell the audience some of the things that, how can they identify if they had a spiritually transformative experience? Uh,
sure.
because I'm sure there's somebody out there or people out there that feel like, well, I didn't have a near death experience, so it's not really that important, right? Because something hasn't clicked yet. And um, I feel very strongly, so I'm getting the vibrations through my body right now, that somebody needs to hear in your words out there. How can they know, did I have a spiritually transformational experience? What is that related to, near death experiences? Like, how can I absorb this information and be like, oh, yeah, that's me?
Oh, absolutely. So not as much is known about spiritually transformative experiences versus NDEs. But what I will tell you is that what the definition I'll give it is it's quite broad. Okay. And that's the beauty of it. It's going to come in all shapes and sizes for people, but I'll be more specific than that. So for some people, a spiritually transformative experience could be something really less supernatural. It could be just an event in their life that is so traumatic that they have this sense that something has literally shaken them. It could be maybe, I'll just give one example. It could be maybe the mother that has an experience where we've heard this story where she's in the car, get in an accident, she lifts up the car that she shouldn't be able to lift up and saves her kids. It also could be the person who actually watches or listens to that story and hears it and gets inspired in some way and gets triggered by it. It could be somebody that has these abilities, let's call them, to either what's it called? Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Where the out of body lucidness experiences that they have in the dreaming that they do. Okay, where they just
Astral projection.
thank you, astral
Wow.
projecting. People who astral project, people who have had experiences with UFOs, people that have had experiences where they have been in a haunting. Okay. Those are the supernatural ones, but the other ones can just simply be they're reading a book, they're reading a spiritual book, or they're watching a movie, and all of a sudden something hits them out of nowhere, and they go, "Oh, excuse my French, oh shit," you know, something really is speaking to me here. Something I'm feeling like there's something more to this that I have to realize. What's really cool about spiritually transformative experiences is it doesn't have to be something that is paranormal or supernatural. In many cases it is, but not, I have students who are what I call dream makers. They have these very lucid dreams where they can either see themselves in the dream and stop the dream or change the dream, or they have these dreams that are just so profoundly symbolic in terms of what they're trying to say. And then weeks later, it comes to life. And I was talking to you about that just before we got on. There's all sorts of different ways that people are now being given a chance to tap into something that will help awaken them. So I always tell my students, I said, you know, don't feel as though you're behind the eight ball just because you didn't have a near death experience. I mean, every single one of them, when we start to discuss their life, and we don't do a lot of this. When I say we, I mean me and the collective. We don't do a lot of that, but when we do, we realize, oh, spiritually transformative experience. These were moments in time that literally shifted their reality in a way that they started asking the big question. What's the big question? Who am I? Why am I here? What is God? I mean, so questions, what is God? All this, when you start to have those, usually they're called defining moments as well, but they're spiritually transformative. You spiritually are transforming yourself. So it can come in different shapes and sizes. It doesn't have to be like this big, oh, wow, moment. But more and more of students are seeing, I have students who have shown me videotapes of them watching a UFO in the sky. It's just crazy stuff. It doesn't really matter. They could be walking. One student was walking down a path. She was hiking, and she literally was met up by what she felt was a spirit guide on her path. They had a conversation, and it was deep. And then she wound up finding out that the person that she was talking to was quote unquote a spiritual guide that had existed in that area. All sorts of different things. I mean, and it's happening everywhere now. It's popping up everywhere.
Actually, I'd like to tell a little story about something that happened to me. There's two things that I wanted to say here that I'm feeling might
Okay,
be
but
appropriate
before
for
you
the
do that,
class. Yes.
I should warn people right now. I should warn people that when she tells a story right now, okay, so go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to say the short little thing about something that you had mentioned about, if you're reading something and you just get this experience where, oh, something makes sense, and go a little bit deeper where there's sometimes you might be doing something and all of a sudden it's like a lightning bolt of
Yeah,
you feel like you've just been given a whole bunch of information that you understand everything about, and then in an instant it flashes away and you're like, what is that? Kind of like when you wake up out of a dream and you can't remember the dream, but you feel like you have these glimmers of it,
yeah,
but you just can't bring it out. That also is a spiritually transformational experience.
absolutely.
And some people call that a download, or, a download in a certain way. So hold on to
Yeah,
that, because you have information that just got stored within you
yeah.
by using subconsciously.
I know there were two stories you were going to tell. So that one, I would just want to say that is a huge example of a spiritually transformative experience where, whether it's in dream state or whether it's in something that just catches your attention, but you feel like all of a sudden you have received something that you weren't usually aware of, accustomed to, and it makes you look at your reality in a different way, and it stays with you, like it's not going away. That download, as you call it, which a lot of people will call it that, is a massive spiritually transformative experience.
Yes, absolutely. And it reminded me, your conversation, it just reminded me of back when I was 18 at the time. It was 1993. My parents were leading these relief missions during the Bosnian War. And they actually were helping both sides because they weren't taking a side. They were just helping people who needed help, bringing supplies in and helping a lot of innocent children that lost their parents, and just so many different ways that they were able to create and execute this relief mission. So we went over there. I was blessed with being able to go there with them for one of the missions. And so 1993, I was 18 years old, and we got into the church that there was a visitation from Mother Mary to the children, because we were in Medjugorje.
Oh,
So
I've heard of that place.
yeah, and the children that, well, they're grown adults now, and so the adults now that Mary had visited repeatedly over years and years since they were children. So we got to be in that space. And I
Yeah.
remembered we were waiting, and we got in. There were, I don't know how we got in there, probably from people that my parents, worked with and stuff. And I remembered sitting in the pew, and then we were told, okay, the people that were coming in, I forgot her name, like there were two of them that came in that were going to receive the message. So we were just there to witness them receiving their message, right? And I remember sitting at the pew, and I just felt so calm. And they told us, okay, that like it's going to happen now. So everybody quiet. We were just there. And I remembered putting my head down on my hands and just being, I had my eyes closed, and this peace just came over. And it reminds me of the peace that came over in my near-death experience. It was just this space of like time stops. And I was in this space and just feeling the presence of Mother Mary, higher power, however you want to look at it out there.
Yeah.
This presence came into the place, and I had a consciousness of where I was and what was happening, yet I was like subconsciously, or my consciousness was also somewhere else. And I just remembered receiving some kind of information. I don't know what it was. It was a download, and I just received something. And then I came back, and when I opened my eyes, my mom looked at me and she said, "You fell asleep." And I said, "No, I wasn't sleeping at all. I wasn't tired at all. I was conscious, yet I went somewhere." And she said, "Oh, you were slain in the spirit." So yeah, you can look at it that way. I was slain in the spirit, and just was in this very calm, peaceful place, surrounded by those energies, and allowing it to just do whatever it needed to do for me.
Right. Yeah. Spiritually transformative. Even though you already had an NDE, you had, and I know we talked about this, we both have talked about the subsequent STEs that we've had as well. And that's obviously another example of that. And that, again, that could have been anybody in that room. It could have been all the ones who had been there prior or after that room. Those are the types. You don't have to be necessarily in a space like that. I mean, you were
Right.
very fortunate to have been in a space like that. But again, it's for those who are, like you said, for those who are listening, it's about the fact this episode, this discussion we're talking about could very well trigger an STE. So it just comes in all different shapes and sizes for people. It doesn't have to necessarily be something along the lines of supernatural.
Right. It can just happen to you in the middle of a regular day, what you
Yep.
consider a regular day. All of a sudden, a light bulb goes off because you're ready.
Yep. And I have had people who have said that, and it very much feels like a dystopian movie, right? Where you're just living your life, and then all of a sudden, bam, it just changes. I've had many people say it's just like, I don't know what happened. One day I'm this, and the next day I'm that. And
Oh,
when it becomes that, it really becomes life changing. And you've whatever it was that caused it in that 24-hour span, or 12-minute span, or 2-second span, something triggered, and away you went. And it's not all that different. Yeah, granted, there are things about the near-death experience that make it rather unique, but there's still the same outcomes. The outcomes of desire and knowing yourself to be more, and feeling this. I've had many people who have said, I feel like I want to go home. And they've never had a near-death experience,
right.
but yet they know home. Why? Because they already are there. They're trying to wake up and remember that they have never left home, which gets into the real mind trippy, questions that people start to ask. The part where you were saying that the mind can't really, the way that the mind currently operates is having a hard time grasping all that. And yet
Hence
people feel it.
existential crises, right?
It is. It,
That
it,
that that can actually be an STE that
yes.
you're going through, and you're just mislabeling it as this, midlife crisis or existential crisis, because guess what? Something switched inside of you that is saying, hey, this isn't me, right?
Yeah.
Whatever is rocking your world at the time, there's this thing that's happening within you that says, wait a minute, I'm recognizing that I'm something greater.
Yeah.
So there's a release that it's calling to happen, and really dive deep and get real with yourself about what it is that you want.
You hit it right on the head of the nail, because I mentioned that when I had these experiences early on in my life, I could not share them with anybody else. I knew the repercussions of it. So I went through a massive spiritual crisis of my own that lasted decades,
Mm,
because I was always concerned that what I was experiencing wasn't normal. And yet it was absolutely normal. And everything that I was sort of, in a sense, detaching myself from, which was basically most of the way the world views itself, was the subnormal part of my existence. And so, to your point, I've had discussions with people, and I've been on other shows where I talk about this within the context of people who are having mental health illnesses. That up until very recently, we didn't even talk about mental health. We didn't even acknowledge it as something that really needed to be given a lot of attention to. But we're still not there yet in terms of the brevity, the extremity of all this. It's really huge. But more importantly, like with people who are experiencing depression and anxiety and bipolarism and all of these mental health conditions, even I will go and say this is not a mental health condition, but it gets sometimes placed in it, and it's autism, in terms of how do these things relate to the bigger picture of what's happening right now, and what's been happening for a long, long time. And that is that when people start to see themselves as different, they've always been told that that means it's a bad thing. And they often then try to weave their way back into this world that is insane. And that makes it even worse for them, because they're trying to align their frequency, their identity of who they are, with something that never made sense to them to begin with. In the world that we exist now, those people, even the ones that are checking out, okay, are doing so because they have tried to maneuver their way through this dense reality. And if you could do it to the extent that you can realize that you're doing it, to your point, because you are unique, you are perfectly special, then you can weave your way through it and find your awakening. And those in and of themselves are spiritually transformative experiences. Okay. You don't go through that kind of stuff and not feel spiritually transformed. But many of them can't figure it out because many of them don't have the support system to say, oh, wait a minute, you're going through a spiritually transformative experience. It's not that you're experiencing depression or mental health issues because there's something wrong with you. You're
Yeah.
experiencing because everything is turning on in you. And you need that support system to realize you're waking up. You're waking up to your truth. That's a huge difference. And if people don't have that, many of them do check out or get severely medicated in ways that they shouldn't be.
Because they
So
don't know what else to do.
they
So
don't. They,
for those that are sitting out there and saying, oh my gosh, like this is me, and I think I want to learn more, where can they go to find you, Franco?
um, I have a website. It's called The Closet Spiritualist, theclosetspiritualist.com. And I always have to stress the thought because there's another website that doesn't have that. And so sometimes people get lost over there. But in there, I talk about my life story a little bit more, and I refer to the book as well. And I explain the services that I provide. And I do coach. I don't coach. I really guide people. I really, again, I view myself as a guide. I view myself as someone that will show people what's called the way of the inner child, which is a very unique practice that was lost thousands of years ago, where it's referenced in various ancient traditions and books, but it's a way of waking up gently to an innocence and wonderment of this life that you just inherited as a spiritual being. So all of that's in my website, and I have students, and I consult and whatnot. And so I'd be happy to talk to people if they're experiencing what I'm describing, because there are many out there who are waking up like this. And I don't have to tell you because you also work with a lot of people that way.
Yeah, so we're needed out there, and we're a safe place where there's no judgment for people to be able to say, because people, it's funny because I'm sure you get this all the time, Franco, where a client will come and be like, well, this is going to sound crazy. Well, maybe not to you, but
Exactly.
right? Because it's not crazy. You're not crazy. There's so much out there, and it's really hard to wrap your head around. Even, I mean, let's just lay it out there, Franco, right? We were talking earlier, and it was just like, we talk to each other, and it's things unlock, and it's like poof, poof, poof.
Yes.
And still, we're not different from other people, where we're not reaching new levels for ourselves either. And that's the beauty of it, is there's always another level to gain, more knowledge to gain, more understanding. And the more we talk to each other, the more we work with each other, the more we understand ourselves and each other. It's this beautiful thing that just unfolds, and life just happens. We're allowed to just be here. So if that's what you want to feel, is just this being at peace, being yourself, and allowing life to unfold before you, instead of trying to fit all the pegs in the wrong shaped holes,
Yeah.
that's not how we're meant to live our lives. And
No.
sometimes it just needs to be unloaded.
And that's that's the beginning process of it all. It's the unloading, right? Because when
Yes.
the very first time that I meet with students, there's this one that the very first meeting is about the unloading, and it helps us, meaning myself and the collective that I channel, to give perspective to how they got to this point. But then after that, and I know we were going to talk about this not in this discussion, but when we were talking before we got on this discussion, we were going to go off into areas about karma and empathy and all sorts of things that help define who we are, but have been misunderstood so significantly. But again, I'm very careful not to talk about them because we could go off for an hour on another subject.
Maybe we have to have you back.
Well, I'd love to be back. The thing that I want to stress to people, and we did talk a little bit about this, is that this time that we're in now this time, this moment in time is very different from any other time that we have ever, if you believe in reincarnation and what have you, never has it been this way before. And I stress this with people because in the book I talk about this thing called the game. Okay. And it's not meant to be a metaphor. It's an actual thing. Okay. And in the game, there are these things called the dream states. And it's our ability to fall asleep and forget who we are and how we use these lives to remember who we are. And in the past, it had a different meaning to it. And so there's this thing called the old dream state and the new dream state. And I'm not going to get into all the particulars, but what I want to leave people with is this. We have changed the dynamics of why we're here. The things that even spiritually we came here to do, you hear about how we came here to learn things and to go through lessons. Even that has changed. And where we're at now in our evolution as spiritual beings is that we are now here to do one thing and one thing only. And this is the part that starts to get it really super simple, but also super complicated. Okay. And that is that we're here only to wake up. I mean, yes, there are things that we want to do, and we feel this drive to want to be of servitude to others and all that. But the one thing that we're here to do is to wake up out of this dream. And to wake up out of this dream means that the other thing we have to accept, and this gets back to that thing that I never finished saying about my near-death experience. And when I realized what I saw, they whisked me back. It was as if they wanted me to experience this thing that I was seeing. And someday I would then translate it to other people. And that is that we have to accept that all of this is a simulation, which really starts to really blow people's minds. This is a game, a playful game that we designed to experience ourselves as what? As God. We are not just an expression of God. We are God. And there's a whole there's even, I tell people that later on when I was channeling, I got reaffirmation of this because there's references in sacred books like the Bible that talk about the fact that we are God. How so? Just one real quick reference. There is in one of the channelings that I did with my collective, I too was kind of questioning, how is this possible that we can be God? If I'm going to go out there and tell people that we are God, I better have something to give them because their analytical mind is going to need something to chew on. So in that process, I was given a reference, but this is referenced in other books everywhere, in every tradition, every culture. The reference in this particular case was this one passage in this one book of the biblical book that is called Genesis, for those who are aware of those. And in there, there's a verse, chapter 1, verse 26. And again, I'm not biblical, okay, but I wanted to get a reference of something. And in that one verse, it talks about how humanity was created. And in that verse, it says that God, okay, let's just use that term. I know some people get turned off by it, but that God said, let us create humanity in our image. It was plural. What I saw in that moment when I died was that all of these speckles of light that I saw, infinite light that went on forever, that made up this massive orb, were the individuality of the us and the our. But it went even deeper than that. It went deeper because at that moment I realized, and this was the real groundbreaking stuff, that it wasn't that we are an expression of this thing we call God. Because I think now we're starting to accept that there might be this divinity in us, because back in the day, that wasn't even acceptable. We were just like these little things that were out there on our own. But that isn't the full story. The full story is that we, as individual supreme beings, came together as a collective, which is why a lot of people who channel call the channeling portion the collective. We formed a collective known as oneness. We created the image that we now know of as source, God, spirit, whatever. We are God. We have always been God. We are that powerful. So they always would say to me, they meaning Caleb, the collective, they would say to me, imagine an ocean. And you know that the ocean is made up of droplets.
Mhm.
And they would say, the ocean cannot exist without the droplets. However, the droplets can't exist without the ocean. And if you view it that way, you now start to understand how the beginnings of something that doesn't really have a beginning began. How did this all begin? In a sense, it's because we formed it. And that changes the narrative completely, because now we go from being these little peon things that don't even have a connection with anything to all of a sudden being the thing that created everything. We are extraordinarily powerful, extraordinarily. And
Yes.
that's the message. That's the awareness. That's the awakening. That's why we're here right now. And so it's different. The game has changed. And even the experiences have changed. And that's why people are running around now. Hundreds of thousands, millions, and more are coming in a sense of they're waking and going, oh, is it possible that I can actually believe there's something greater about me? And is it possible that I'm resonating with what he's saying? Is it possible that I am God? Game over.
And I think it's also important to mention here is that, if it doesn't resonate right now or ever, that's
Good
okay
point.
too, because there are also different stages, different levels of awareness that you will go through. And it's part of the process, because there's a questioning that comes up, and then you go through that phase of whatever that is. It brings a new level of awareness. And then down the road, the same thing's going to happen, but at a different level. So if you reference like the game, you're going to defeat the end level monster, which is your own fears and your own insecurities and your own thoughts and all this stuff. And you go deeper and deeper as you go higher and higher in these levels, right? And you
Yeah.
understand stuff. You gain the equipment, the tools, the skills to go to the next level. I use diving boards when I talk to my clients, that every time you go up to another diving board, what happens? When you jump off, you dive deeper.
Mm-hmm.
So there's new depths to explore, because sometimes people say, well, I thought that I got rid of this, right? Well, you did at a certain level. But then when you dove deeper, you understand that there's actually something a little bit at another
Yeah.
level, another angle that you have that you weren't able to see before. So just look at this information as, if that part doesn't resonate, it may not resonate yet, it may never resonate, and that's okay. Because whatever your journey is, whatever your experience is, there's always more to understand, to learn, and to also teach. So
Yeah, I think that's really well said. It's really nicely put, because a lot of people don't necessarily quite experience that resonance right away. The one thing that will say, and we were just talking about this before we got on, that there is this sense that everything is pulling itself to a particular point now, where the way it's been described to me in many of the channelings that I have done, and this is also in the book too, is that these stages of linear time are coming to an end. And in every discussion I've had with people, there is this sort of sense that something is out there and it's coming to an end, but the end isn't the way that we have been shown. The end is actually the beginning of something enormously beautiful. And so one thing that I do stress with people is that those who don't, regardless of where you're at in your awakening, the process that you have taken and that I have taken have been longer. For there is a particular reason why we went through this in a much longer span. But those who are awakening now are not going to experience that long span. Whereas with you, it's been all your life. With me, it's been all my life. With some people, it's been all their life. But in other people, it's just in the last few years, last few months, maybe at most a decade. Regardless of what it is, everything is starting to come together into a space where those who are waking up now are going to do it, and tomorrow and the next day are going to do it in a much shorter period of time. We are in a massive global transition, a massive one. And so the awakening process is also going to fall in line with that. It's going to speed up for everybody. It's not going to take you a series of endless ups and downs like you and I have had to get there. You're going to have those spiritually transformative experiences fast. And when they hit, they're going to come and come and come and come. And
What
I think that's a great news. I think that's great news for everybody.
that is fantastic news. And I feel like the reasons why there are people in the world that are like you and I that have it spanned such a significant amount of our lifetimes is we also needed to experience a multitude of these different angles
You
of
got it.
adversities and challenges and the inner stuff and being alone and going through all of those things that people are feeling out there that we can identify. So it's kind of like the library, right? Or
Yes.
the mages and the sages. You go talk to the sage because they have that knowledge, wisdom, experience, and they're old, right? They're
Yes.
old because they have all this lifetime of this wisdom, knowledge, and experience in order to help you get somewhere super quick that it
Yes.
doesn't take you that, because we're not meant to take that long. But some people need to be the guides, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. You just, yeah. I mean, I'm just going to sit here and go, yeah. Yeah.
that's
Ditto.
what it is,
Ditto.
right? Because some people, that was, if you think about it, that's their job, right? If you want to think about what we do here on earth is like we've got an assignment, right? Here's our
Yes.
mission. So in order for all of these people to know what the heck they're doing and not feel so overwhelmed, here, you warrior woman or warrior man or whatever you want to assign to this, is here, you go out there and you go experience all this stuff so that you can take these people and show them how quickly they can get through that and they don't have to go through all of that, right?
You had me at hello.
Hello.
Hello. Seriously, I mean,
Yes.
that you just summed it up beautifully. I mean, that is exactly how I approach everything that I talk with people about, whether they're my students or whether we're on a show like this, is that you summed it up perfectly. In the book, I talk about the stage that we're in right now, where most of the ones who are waking up just in the last few years and now are the ones that have, not in all cases, but are the ones that are looking at their lives and going, oh my God, I've had all these experiences, and in many ways, I almost feel at times like I'm listening to my own story when I hear them. And those are the people that did that, like you pointed out, so that they could have a plethora of human experientialness, so that they could walk the talk, okay, not just talk it. And that's how I explain it. You can't just come here. You could, but it just defeats the whole purpose of being the guide. Is if you just, oh, I've done this before in another life, I've done this in another school, I can do this without having to go through the experience, the human experience. There's nothing about the human experience that you could have ever done anywhere else. You have to, even as the guide, even those that are waking up now, that are going to show the way for others, they did it so that out of unconditional love to experience all of the pain as much as they could, so that when others would come later, those people, to your point, would do this in a much more expedited manner. We don't have, in the course of the linear timeline that we've been given, and not just my timeline, but other timelines. I've told you just before we got on that the timelines are all matching up everywhere in every tradition. And those
Yeah.
timelines are saying that it's happening right now, and that the things that are going to occur that transition us into this thing we call nirvana, heaven on earth, the unknown gateless gate, whatever you want to call it, is going to happen in a relatively short period of time. We don't have the luxury of taking the next 20 or 30 years to figure out the rest of what we're doing here, much less help those that are coming. They're here to celebrate this awakening, not to spend the next 20 or 30 years trying to figure it out. So that's why I always tell people everything that I've done in my life, and I've encompassed it in this course of the way of the inner child. I tell them that that in 4 or 5 months, you're going to have a spiritually transformative experience unlike anything you've ever experienced. It took me 40 years to do. It's going to take them 4 or 5 months, because that's all we have. We don't have the time. We have other things we are here to do. That's where the servitude stuff comes in. We're now ready to bring our light into the world. This is an incredible time. But to your point, even to you and me, we're still evolving into our higher levels. And we're still going and
Yeah,
seeing things like that. I mean, the
it's
story,
awesome.
it is awesome. It is awesome. I mean, like I told you, my hair used to be straight, and now it's like this because I can't deal with all of it. It's so crazy. So, but it's a beautiful crazy.
Your new book that you're working on
Oh,
is,
it's called The Modern Day Alchemist. Thanks for asking. It is my goal. Even though I had a hard stop here in the last few months to kind of process and go through some things that I needed to get ready for the next wave of what's happening now with all these people waking up. But it's called The Modern Day Alchemist. And it was when I finished the book, The Closet Spiritualist, and I was sitting there and I was literally typing the last sentence out. And I was typing the period of that last sentence. So there's a lot of interaction in the book between myself and the collective. And there's also a lot of storytelling in the book so that it helps for people to relate. And in the book, there was the struggle between, not in the book, outside of the book, because there was a struggle between the collective, the Caleb, wanting to have a whole chapter. I mean, this is just a little quick funny story, but they wanted to have a full chapter to say what they said. They wanted to say it, but they're scattered everywhere in the book. And so what we agreed on, I know it sounds kind of interesting, but what we agreed on is that they would have a good chunk of the last chapter to say what they wanted to say to sum up things. And so it was really quite beautiful because I was actually crying at the end when I was writing it. And I was like, I don't even know why I'm crying. It's like, you guys are with me all the time, but I feel like we just went through something so incredible that I didn't want it to end. And so so right at the end, they said, as I hit the period, I said, thank you. I am so, 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 so grateful for the experience of writing this book. And they said, don't worry, you're not done yet. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, you're going to write 8 more books. And I said, 8 more books? I don't even know how I put this together. You're going to want me to do 8 more books? I said, I don't even know what do you want me to talk about? And then they proceeded. They said, sit down and we're going to give you all of the synopsises for 8 books. And so in the next hour and a half, I wrote the synopsis for every book that I was going to write that I didn't even know existed yet. And in one of those books was this idea of alchemy, and the actual title came right away, The Modern Day Alchemist, because even though I have no clue what alchemy, at the time I had no clue what alchemy was. I certainly I never practiced it. I didn't know the school of alchemy, the mystical schools or any of that.
yeah.
And I told them that. I said, I don't have any idea. What, do you want me to go research this stuff and you're going to share the rest? They said, and they always told me this. They said, don't worry, it will come to you. We will, to your words, we will download it and you'll get it. And so basically that happened. And it turned out that I started writing a book about a new form of alchemy, that the alchemy that actually really, and when I say new, I want to be really careful. It's not like it's really new because we're doing it all the time, but it was about the alchemy of the mind, which was to say that everything that we have ever created, everything that we assume is material, was created in our consciousness. And that we, when we became aware of who we were, like we were just talking about, when we become aware of how powerful we are, we will know that everything that is here was created and is being created through our minds. And so it's about the alchemy of the mind. It's about being aware of yourself as God, consciously aware of it, so that you can become the mystic, the sorcerer, the godliness, the being, and actually play in the world where you can create the life of your dreams. Not in terms of money and stuff like that. I mean, that's fine if that's what you want, but I mean everything that would define heaven on earth would be in your reach because you're creating it. You just didn't know it. So the whole book is about how that process works. Really easy, so that by the time you're done, you have all the tools by which you can become fully aware of who you are, because awareness is the big deal. This is the big price, awareness. If you can fully become aware of who you are, you have reached this thing called God consciousness. And when you get there, you are the frequency that creates everything. And when you're there, you can create magic, which is me as God imagining and creating magic. And that's the whole book. It's how you now come to the realization of that.
I love that because what's coming to me right now is I want to say, you know, it feels like there's a challenge that goes with that, and a challenge in a good, fun, lighthearted way where I just want to say, and take this with you, Franco. I don't care. It's almost like this goes with the whole concept of, because if you like, I want to challenge all of you listening to be God for a day. Think
Yes.
like God for one day and see what happens. Because if you actually just, whether you feel you are so far away from God, just get into a game state and play it out for one day. What are you creating with your thoughts, with your actions, with your words? And if you become very present and aware of what you're thinking, feeling, saying, doing, experiencing, creating experiences for others, if you really step into that space of, if I am God right here, right now, what am I doing in my life and those around me's lives with every word, every thought, every thing that I'm saying, doing, thinking, being? And just see what happens. If you can do it for a day, see if you can do it for two, and just let it go, because guess what's going to happen when you become aware of that? It is where the magic happens.
Yes.
It really, really is. Everything that Franco said, 100%. If you just fast forwarded to the end, you just heard the best part there is how to really create the reality that you think is worth living, because it really is your creation. So therefore, in your reality, you are the God of your reality. So if you have to think about it at that like neophyte level, just play the game for a day and see what happens.
You know what? Yeah. Because that is exactly what we do. So with a lot of the way of the inner child is that I'm taking the students in that way. I'm taking them deep within themselves to experience, what is it like to experience yourself as God? And again, it's all these fun, playful awareness games that we play. One of them is actually pretend that you are God for a
Yep.
day. and see how well you do with the very things you just said.
There it is.
Yeah. And I am telling you, it is the most profound and the most powerful tool to have, is to realize from an awareness standpoint what you are. The whole process of this fourth dimension that we never talk about is the expansion of your awareness into God consciousness, into Christ consciousness, Buddha consciousness, divine feminine, whatever. It's that whole process. And so that's what the book's about. But we bring it, the collective and I bring it down to a very simple, playful way of remembering.
Well, this alchemist is looking forward to reading your alchemy book.
Oh, thank you.
All right, everyone. I hope that you got a bundle of nuggets there for what it's worth in your life, and you apply the things that you've learned today to shift your reality into whatever it is that you wish to make it. So thank you again, Franco, for being here.
Thank you.
Most wonderful experience every single time. And to all of you out there, how great can it get? Go ask that and go create that. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Goodbye for now.
Thank you for joining us for the Majik and Miracles podcast, where everyday folks like you share their life-changing stories. The world wants to hear your extraordinary story, so is it about time you tell it? You might just end up being someone else's miracle waiting to happen. If you would like to be a guest on the show, please submit your application for consideration. If you would like to nominate a guest or submit a personal story to be read on the show, please contact us via email. In the meantime, enjoy the journey. You never know when you will experience a miracle that will change your life forever, or if you will become someone else's real-life angel. Goodbye for now, and see you on the next episode of Majik and Miracles, the podcast with wings.